welcome back to Atypical Talk. This is a podcast where we have conversations that illuminate the intersection of faith, culture, and the common spaces of our humanity. I'm Abby.
And I'm Joel. And today we have a special guest with us for some conversations that I've been excited about having for, almost like a month now. As we've been dreaming and planning and scheming this, we have our friend Creation Desautels with us. And we connected with Creation back in October of last year as we were planning a sermon series at Bridgeway about mental health and the intersection of mental health and Christian spirituality, trying to destigmatize mental health in lots of different ways and bring resources to people in our community. And Creation had the simple and the soft toss up in the air task of talking about trauma. And it was just a really impactful conversation that we were able to film with her. And we were just thinking like, man, we've got to get Creation on the podcast to talk more about this because she's got a lot to say. And I love the way that she thinks about things. And it's just a great, challenging conversation. So Creation, thanks so much for being on Atypical Talk. Why don't you tell us just a little bit about your professional life and how you got to the work that you're called to do.
Okay, so thanks for having me on. I am currently working as a licensed marriage and family therapist in Kokomo, Indiana. I completed my degree about 4 years ago. Since then, I've done extensive follow-on training, so I am super specialized. I do faith-integrated care. That doesn't mean anybody has to align with my particular faith background. I do have prior allegiances that I bring into the room, but also if you're of a different faith, I weave this, I think those things inform who the human person is. So that informs all of my work, and that's part of my specialty. But then my follow-on training is in the area of sex therapy and also in the area of it's emotion-focused therapy, which is a couples model, but also can be used for individual and family systems work. So I'm kind of niched in those areas. I do therapy proper with individuals, couples, families. I work as an adjunct professor for William Jessup University.
Professor Creation.
I mean, it's adjunct. I'm not I'm not tenure track. Let's not get me I don't have a placard or anything, right?
That's the one thing. When you get the placard, that's when everything changes.
Yeah, it's not legit. It's not in writing. But I do on an ad hoc basis. I teach for them, and I've done some baccalaureate level teaching on a variety of clinical and therapeutic issues for them. I speak and I educate and I coach primarily in those areas of specialty, like couples or family communication and or couples or individuals dealing with sex-related topics, which is actually a massive umbrella. Whatever you think it is, it's that, and then a bunch of stuff you've just never thought of. Mm-hmm. So those are my domains.
Yeah, one of the reasons that we wanted to connect with Creation was that she is a follower of Jesus who is also a mental health professional. She is not a biblical counselor, but she has gone through the schooling. She is certified, and so she brings the science of these things to bear with her faith in Jesus and her allegiance to Jesus. So I love that intersection of your faith story and the work that you're called to do. So that's one of the reasons that we wanted to have you on and talk. Specifically, these next 2 episodes are going to be about some things with psychology and mental health and the intersection of that and faith. So, Abby, take us away with where we're going first.
So our first topic today is a Guardian article by David Cox titled, "They Thought They Were Doing Good, But It Made People Worse. Why Mental Health Apps Are Under Scrutiny." The need for sophisticated digital alternatives to conventional face-to-face therapy has been well established in recent years. While companies like BetterHelp are hoping to address some of the barriers that prevent people from seeking therapy, there's a concerning side to many of these platforms. Namely, what happens to the considerable amounts of deeply sensitive data they gather in the process. The Mozilla Foundation surveyed 32 leading mental health apps for a report last year and found that 19 of them were failing to protect user privacy and security. We found that too often your personal, private mental health struggles were being monetized, says Jen Coltrider, who directs Mozilla's consumer privacy advocacy work. Studies have also shown that people with suicidal thoughts who took advantage of online therapy were worse off after the study. Some of the biggest concerns are linked to AI chatbots, many of which have been marketed as a safe space for people to discuss their mental health or emotional struggles. Yet Cult Writer is concerned that without better oversight of the responses and advice these bots are offering, these algorithms may be manipulating vulnerable people. So what do you think about these apps? Like, do you think they can still be helpful despite all the negatives that are highlighted? What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, they're taking Creation's jobs.
Yeah,
like, that's
yeah.
really what the bots are taking the jobs, right? You know, the whole idea of technology,
gonna be outsourced to
AI.
Yeah.
So, in the interest of full disclosure, I actually early on, man, it's been over a year, I worked as a provider for BetterHelp, and I exited use of BetterHelp in less than a month.
Oh wow!
I was not here for that, like for a variety of reasons, and I do currently partner on an exceedingly limited basis with a different platform called Grow. I'm not advertising for them. I'm saying that I felt like they had a more robust vetting process. I think they did a little bit better setting up of what therapy is and what can be expected of it. Having said that, as somebody that uses it, I don't love it either. So not a huge fan, but I am familiar from the provider side. And as I read the article, I felt like there was a lot that I could speak to, but it wasn't the main concerns raised in the article, in the sense that BetterHelp is primarily a technology company, and the deliverable is therapeutic goods and services. Right. I don't know anything about tech. I'm a therapist for a reason. I'm not tech savvy, and so I can't really speak to the dangers of aggregated data. I can't speak to the manipulation of. The reality is, it's beyond my scope of education, and rather than trying to conjecture, I'd be like, I do know a tech guy who's a Christian. If you want to bring him on, I'm sure he could talk all about privacy and about aggregated data and about manipulation and algorithm use. I have nothing to say apart from the people that I do know that know things in that space. I think there's tremendous abuse potential. That's it. That's all I got on that. Having said that, the things that I can speak to are the ways we choreograph mental health care through use of apps, I think sets both the provider and the consumer up for failure. I was actually just talking about this with Kate, who attends here, and we're colleagues, and one of the value propositions of BetterHelp or any of the online platforms or even the bots is the idea of like Burger King style mental health care, your way, right away. And it even in the article, it talks about like the necessity for this has actually been well established. And as a clinician, I want to push back on that. I actually don't think that we're getting what we think we're getting. When they talk about like there is market demand for that, I agree that there is market demand. But just because there is demand does not mean that it is rightly ordered to issue a steady supply. And
there's not maybe an infrastructure to actually supply it the correct way, even if there is a demand for it.
Yes, but actually what I'm saying is even deeper than that. I think that it is subpar at base. And there's a reason why I think it's subpar at base. I think I got used to doing online from my face-to-face practice during early COVID. And when I talked to other clinicians, we would talk about twice the effort for half the therapeutic gains. And I think that there are a lot of really, really good reasons for this. When we go with a platform like BetterHelp, we are functionally advertising mental health care as if human people are brains on sticks, right? Like you can look at this screen here and you can imbibe some data and some wisdom from a talking head. And then this is what's going to help you make therapeutic gains. But I actually think the exact opposite is true. I think when two or more people sit in person, in real time, real space, real proximity, and they navigate the realities of the temperature of the room, of the lighting in the room, the smell, how people locomote and move their bodies or don't. These things are a real live person-to-person encounter. When we negate that, the deliverable becomes like, you can talk to somebody that knows a lot of stuff.
It's content, it's information.
And it's consumed much like if you were watching a custom for you YouTube video. But I'm not primarily a content creator or provider. That's not what I do. And when we reduce the therapeutic alliance to that, I think we do so at our peril. We're treating people in this very dualistic fashion. You're a brain on a stick. You're not a body soul knit together who's having a real embodied journey. Yeah. And your therapist isn't a real embodied partner in that journey. And I think when we lose that, you know, if that's the only thing you can do, if you have certain phobias, if you have certain disabilities, I'm not saying there's no place for it. I'm saying when we make that the frontline thing in the name of convenience, we are doing a disservice to what therapy can, should, and ought be.
You're just preaching to my soul about online church is what you're doing. I mean, it's a very similar thing. Like, and to me, like, I can take this back to like 1st through 3rd century Christianity and the Gnostic heresy. Like, so Gnosticism, it was this heresy that actually crept its way into early Christianity. And it was this idea that was actually picked up by like Aristotle and Plato and popularized by them. But this idea that like true reality and true abundance is on the other side. It's away from this life. This life is hard, bad. The physical is actually broken in a way. Right?
Well, that's the dualism, right? This idea dualistic. That I am a ghost in a machine. Yes. Like I have an essence that wears a meat suit, and I actually really reject that.
Yeah. I think Christian orthodoxy rejects that too. Jesus being like fully embodied, fully God being in a human, and so like that embodied experience it's everything. It was the way that God chose to send the message of the kingdom and life abundant was through an embodied person. And true, beautiful, abundant life is embodied. It's not through a screen. And so, of course, in therapy, it's going to be such a less than experience because it's content. It's not transformational, face-to-face, person-on-person life.
So I think that it's bad. At the,
on the whole, it's bad.
It's it's bad. I don't like it. But I also think, and here's the other thing that I think people don't realize about themselves, which is, and I say this about me too, like, people are inherently lazy. Like, we're going to do the most efficient thing we can do. And so when somebody says, like, you can have this therapeutic value delivered to you in this convenience package, we feel like that just makes good sense. Oh, I can schedule that in between this, and that seems like I'm being a good steward of my time. But the thing I want to say is, if somebody was screaming at their kids or watching C-SPAN right before they jump, they click a button and they jump on screen with me, what they have done is none of that embodied preparatory behavior. Just like we have sleep hygiene, just like we have other, there's a preparatory choreography we go to come to church on a Sunday, right? Or to participate in any of the meaningful embodied acts, right? We do this, and that choreography pulls our body soul into the headspace of that experience. And I actually think the fact that you have to leave your work, get in your car, drive for a few minutes, maybe sit in a lobby for a few minutes, these things mean that when you come to my couch, you came to work. Yeah. But if you just, and I've had people and they're on their phone and they're there and they're like, I'm just making myself an omelet. And I'm like, I'm not like.
Let's talk about your childhood trauma and sprinkle in some.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing is, but it's not just that. I've had people try and use the restroom during a session. I'm not making I've had people
turn the screen off.
No, they do. They're like, I'm just gonna switch to audio, and then I hear this like trickle, and I'm like, oh. And the reality is, like,
we're devolving is what's happening.
What I'm saying is, I think that those preparatory acts encourage you to respect and shunt your energies towards the headspace you need to be in when you're, and so I think it's bad at the structure, and I also think it doesn't force focus for the consumer in a way that makes much of the time. So across all domains, in the strongest possible terms, like, don't do online therapy unless you have no other alternatives.
Which I want to speak to the no other alternatives, because I feel like, I mean, this blew up during the pandemic, right?
Sure.
And then the convenience factor was sort of just out there for everyone. But I also know that in at least the last couple of years, I don't know if this has come down in our community, but I know so many people that I would be pointing to a therapist in multiple offices, and they'd be like, I can't get in for 10 weeks. And so I think sometimes people are like, in an emergency, or I don't want to wait 2 months to get in to see somebody, they were like, well, there's an online option. Wasn't that part of the pull as well? And how do you encourage people, like, if they're waiting that long, you know what I mean? Like,
okay, so this is one of those things where, a couple things. Therapists that have wait lists, not all of them, but many of them have wait lists because they're great at what they do. And so if there's some guy that's got like wide open availability and there's a mental health crisis, and I'm not trying to impugn anybody, I'm saying
it's that one guy. It's the one guy we're talking about.
I'm saying no. What I'm saying is you might want to like vet that guy rather than be so excited that you can get FaceTime sooner. You might want to have a discussion about that. So yes, I agree that sometimes it's like, well, if I broaden to the state of Indiana, I can be in front of somebody sooner. But what I would say is, if you're doing that, vet thoroughly and well. Don't just be so excited to have a clinician that you'll take any clinic. Like, they're not all created equal. They have different trainings, they have different working styles, they have different prior allegiances, and I think in some sense people are so desperate to have anybody that they don't look before they leap, and they just start offloading, and then they don't have somebody that really has the component skills to like contain their trauma or whatever. So yes, I get it. What I would say is a little patience goes a long way. And also I think it's a penny wise, pound foolish. Wait 2 months to have that real face-to-face encounter. Most people can wait 2 months. You might not love it, but you probably can. If you can't wait 2 months, chances are good you need emergent care anyway. In which case, go to a local ER. Most ERs have an inpatient. And if you are at that level where you can't hold on, go use emergent service and then wait to be placed with, long-term, a clinician that you can be present with would be...
That's really good advice.
I don't think that's a perfect answer. I think often that's a better answer.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So our second topic today, it's a Psychology Today article by Margaret Rutherford titled How Toxic Positivity Leads to Shame. Toxic positivity occurs when someone ignores or rejects negative emotions and insists on positive thinking instead. They may deny their own emotions, other people's, or both. The problem with toxic positivity goes deeper than merely encouraging good vibes. It's one thing, and can be helpful if said at the right time, to gently remind someone that their pain has meaning, that there's something to be learned from every human experience. It's another to infer or state openly that a person is weak or wrong or not grateful enough because they're feeling the pain of a situation or a loss more deeply. That kind of shame can do more damage than whatever the hurt or pain is itself. The goal is to eventually get to a place where you can rediscover gratitude, but that comes after grieving has happened, after you've been heard, comforted, and understood. Then you can get your bearings and move ahead. Rediscovering gratitude can be a sign of healing from grief. So what are your thoughts on toxic positivity?
I just want to lean into Saint Bob Marley, who said, don't worry about a thing because every little thing's going to be all right. Why don't we just listen to Saint? No, I'm just kidding. That's toxic positivity.
So actually, I think toxic positivity is, I think it's a real thing, and I think it's a real thing culture-wide, but if you want to talk about the people that do it the most and the worst, it's Christians.
Christians, 1,000%.
Christians are the worst at sitting with and containing and making space for, there's this Jesus was a man of joy, which is absolutely true. But what we can do is we can try and, it's like those YouTube jump edits where they show you this thing, and then they like take it out of the oven, and it's like we just try and jump cut.
Oh yeah, like you see them like putting everything together in the pot, and then they put it in the oven, and then all of a sudden, oh wow, it's cooked already.
Yeah, and you pull it out, and you're like, there's no way putting that in produces that out. This is what Christians do. We do the jump cut to the edit end, as opposed to embracing the procedural nature of grief. Grief, mourning, anger, these things are processed in order to be dissipated. We don't just sort of magically and deliciously be like, I'm not mad anymore and I'm not sad anymore because like God is good and God is sovereign. And I believe God is good. I believe God is sovereign. But that doesn't mean that I can always see the unfolding past the here and now. And there are moments of here and now where in my finitude I can't see over, past, or around, and I need process to be on the far side of that here and now, that grief, that loss, that trauma. And it's interesting, the last time we met, I was talking about like the survival spirit of Corrie ten Boom, and this idea of like we should be rigorous in our seeking out of joy and gratitude. But I don't think the way we seek that out is by denying the pain, the suffering, the brokenness, the fallenness, the hurt, the trauma, the anxiety.
Bypassing those things.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's wisdom to the idea of like the way out is not around, but it's through.
But it's through, yeah.
It's through. And I think that's so much of actually the story of Jesus and the story of the scriptures. Like even Easter, which is like this triumphant, victorious thing. Jesus conquered death, but he had to go through death. And I think I've gone through seasons when I've overemphasized just the death of Jesus, and then I've overemphasized the victory of Jesus. And I think some of my theological growth is holding both together and realizing there is no resurrection without us going through the worst. And I think it's Anne Lamott who has this beautiful quote about the body of Christ, Christians. We are Easter people living in a Good Friday world. And this idea that like we can hold both things together because we're living in this already but not yet victory. And you have to actually look at the darkness, look at the evil, so that you really experience and see and can embody the good news, right? And so yes, I mean, I've been around it so much, and you just mentioned like, God is good, God is sovereign, and there's always those Hobby Lobby style Bible verses that are thrown out with good intentions, and they're true, but there can be things that are true but not helpful. And when you're thinking about the other person and putting the other person first, like just saying, it's all going to be all right, God doesn't give you more than you can handle, and we could go through the exegesis of that all around it too. And it's not really helpful. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like there's all those things that there can be true, but they're not helpful. And man, I think that there's such like this shallow veneer of this toxic positivity that like has a Christian branding on it it's just weak sauce compared to the real thing.
I think it is weak, but I also think it's damaging. And
oh yeah.
And I want to go one further, because you say well-meaning. Remember in our last conversation when I was talking about how people are fundamentally lazy?
Yeah.
Okay, I actually think it's more sinister than well-meaning. And here is what I want to put out there.
So dark, Creation.
I don't think,
so dark.
Now, I don't think your rank and file Christian is sitting there like Machiavellian style being like, That's not what I mean when I mean more sinister. Here's what I mean. I mean that I think the vast majority of people that are throwing out those trite aphorisms, I don't actually think they're well-meaning, and I don't think they're self-aware about why they're not well-meaning. Let me unpack that just briefly. What I mean is, it is hard to sit with I know this, I do this for a living. It is hard to sit with somebody in the gray. It's hard to sit there, and it is uncomfortable for me to be in proximity to you in the dark ditch. It's hard to bear witness. It is hard to not try and put a better, kinder, happier spin on it.
Yeah.
So most of the time, when people think they're being well-meaning, what they're really doing is they're seeking their own comfort first. It's actually much easier for me to tell you, like, every little thing's gonna be all right. That's easier for me to take as my takeaway than, like, it's gray, it's ugly, you can't see past it, and you might not for a while. And you know what? My job isn't to tell you the kinder, gentler story. As a Christian, like, it talks about grieving with those who grieve and mourning with those who mourn. My job should actually be willing to, like, crawl down there with you and be like, yeah, it's terrible.
This sucks.
It's terrible down here. This sucks. This is garbage. And I see you in that garbage. I bear witness to you in that. And I'm not going to try and make it any prettier down here than it actually is. I think mostly well-meaning is code word for lazy and pleasant.
Oh, that's good.
I mean, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
and like, I live in the Christian orbit, and like, it happens to me. Like, as a single mom, it's like, you know, things come up in my life and the lives of my kids, and people will be like, but, you know, in God's providence, and like, I do believe in God's providence, but there are moments where I'm like, you know, lady, you with your intact 2-parent home, your glibness, I just want to throat punch you. Like, I'm not gonna.
But I wanna.
But like, in my head, I don't feel like you're well-meaning. What I hear is, wow, your life is uncomfortable for me.
Yeah.
And that's hard. And what we should do as Christians is get more comfortable with the discomfort, more comfortable acknowledging, honoring, sitting with, and participating in, like, yeah, that's hard. That's terrifying. And I don't have good answers, but you don't have to be alone.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and I think we lend too little credence as Christians to the, but you don't have to do it alone.
Yeah. That's like the main point in that.
That's, you just said, you were talking about weak sauce. That's like, that's the real sauce, right? Yeah.
Strong stuff.
The strong stuff is, I can help you not be and not feel alone. I can be the person you can call at 4 a.m. when you're missing the person that died, or when you're having the panic attack, or when you're having a PTSD flashback. The reality is, it's costly to do that. And so I think well-meaning is glib and lazy. I just do.
So there's another thing inside the article they talked about that I think I've experienced a lot in faith circles, in church culture, and it's the idea of just rejecting negative emotions. It's almost like you that's a bad thing to feel, depressed, sad. It's a bad thing to feel, so you just need to think positively, like the joy of the Lord is my strength kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And can you speak to just the long-term damage it is to reject or shove down emotions instead of bringing them forth to God?
So, yeah, clinically, one of the things we see is the repression of the trauma can actually be what creates, like, genuine pathology. No, I'm serious. Because it's like, if you have a childhood trauma, or if you have, like, any really intense negative experience, if you have a place where you can go to and you can be like, okay, I thought this was terrible, and you look me in the eye and go, yeah, like, if I were in your shoes, I think that was terrible. That's terrible. I'm sorry that terrible thing is happening to you, and I can be present with you, and we can, okay, there's solidarity there. Then what happens is, I have an apparatus for metabolizing the thing. And I'm not even alone as I metabolize, right? I get to do it in community and in partnership, and that's really, really a beautiful thing. But if I come to you and I say, this is terrible, and you're like, oh, it's not that bad, right? Joy of the Lord.
Push through.
Right.
Stiff upper lip. Yeah.
And then I go home and I go, I mean, maybe they're right. Like, maybe I'm being really melodramatic. Maybe it's not that big of a deal. That can lead to all kinds of inwardness in terms of, like, the negativity you felt about that experience. You can turn inward and judge the self, like, and wrongly, right? Not self-critique about, like, my participation in a bad thing, but, like, now I'm blaming myself for all of it, or I deserved it, or and again, Christians are really, really genuinely bad at this. We have more of that just world phenomenon than I think any other group I know, which is this idea of, like, we want to look at the world and see the ways that it's just and rightly ordered and fair. And I get that. We have a divine God who is just and rightly ordered. The problem is that we don't adequately take into account the fall or the process to get back to redemption. And we jump at it from those brute facts of who Jesus is, and we jump at it as if we're already in glory. And what we do is we negate the grinding it out of sanctification. And we do this at our peril. And I'd like to point out, this is one of the reasons why I think there's a loss of cultural relevancy in the Christian community, because we all seem like we're Pollyanna. Right? Like, we don't know how to talk about real, genuine, hard, uncomfortable, wildly disturbing things. And actually, that is how I came to do what I do. Yeah. When I needed somebody that could sit with words that Christians don't say on Sunday morning, I couldn't find a faith-aligned therapist that could sit in the kind of garbage I had. Yeah. And the message I got was like, my garbage is too big for like it's too big. Like, Christians don't want that. Like that's like secular garbage.
Yeah.
And I was
that's
like,
the stuff that you're supposed to have story in your past about, but then Jesus came and it all got better.
Yeah. And it's like those. I mean, you hear those altar calls and the music swells, and it's like, my life is garbage, and then Jesus, and I'm like, but what if I have Jesus? What if I had Jesus, and this is still my Wednesday afternoon? What do I do with that? And I think the damage can be, we compound isolation as opposed to saying, I can't fix it, but you're not alone. What we do is we say, oh, I don't even understand that kind of sin and brokenness. Not only are you alone, you're super alone. Like, you're the untouchable. You're the leper class. And like, I don't even want to touch that. Mm-hmm. And I have lived through that. And that was actually one of the seeds of my calling, was during my divorce. The things that came to light and the trauma associated with those were things that most people just wanted to be like, well, Jesus loves you. And I was like, I mean, true, but non-responsive, right? Yeah. Not responsive. So I think it's devastating, and I agree that it compounds and exacerbates and amplifies whatever negative we have. If we shove it down, we amplify, and it leaks out in non-constructive ways, pathological, detrimental, antisocial ways, as opposed to bringing that into relationality and being like, wow, yeah, that is not okay.
Yeah. I think it's interesting as we talk about that and just pushing down emotions. Last summer, our church through the summer, we did this journey through the Psalms. And we called it Voicing Our Emotions because of Eugene Peterson, a great pastor and author and influence in my life. It just talked about the reality of the Psalms. They give you permission to feel whatever you're feeling, but to do it with God instead of in spite of God. And I was so drawn to that picture. And then you read the Psalms and these prayers of David and other psalmists in the Hebrew Scriptures, and like, the songs that we sing typically on Sunday morning is like the praise song, which is like a third, not even a third, like a fifth of maybe all the Psalms. But then there were Psalms of lament, of like just crying out to God, yelling at God, where are you? There were these imprecatory Psalms dealing with anger and these feelings of vengeance. And there was this one interview with Eugene Peterson. He was talking to the lead singer of U2, Bono, and Bono quoted Eugene right to him and says, you once talked about the Psalms as this avenue to cuss at God without cussing. It was like this way to like bring whatever you're feeling to God in a community to where you actually don't do the thing that you want to do. It like diffuses. And so when you talk about Christians, and we say Christians, because, we're a part of that weird family as well, but it's so far, we've lost the plot so far from the story that God gave us when we can't bring whatever we're feeling, and vengeance, anger, depression, sadness, grief, to God and with the family of God. Like, that's the story that we were handed, and it's so much more beautiful, and actually, you're saying clinically healthier as well, right? Yeah.
Well, and this is one of the things that I actually love the data to emerge out of the social science. I think the lenses they use to interpret it often are garbage. But like, when we look at the raw data coming out of social science, yes, what we would find is that it actually aligns with the Psalms, where there is this range of all the things. And it's interesting that you bring up the Psalms. Like, in the denomination I participate in, we exclusively engage in singing from the Psalter. Like, that is all we do.
So like the only songs that you sing are Psalms 1 through 50.
Yeah, like during formal worship. Yeah. It's not that we don't sing other things in other, but like when we are talking like a formal worship setting, we only sing the Psalter. And one of the things that is really, really radical, and I mean like a radical departure from mainline Christianity about that is we, like, especially on Sunday nights, we sequentially sing through every one, which means over the course of 150 Sundays, you get like, God is great and I cannot contain my joy. And you also get, could you put the beat down on those guys over there? Like, I want you to rain
rain fire on this.
You know, I mean, it talks about crushing skulls. Like, this is not, is not like a light degree of like, this is like,
Lord, you are good and
yeah. And so, and I think it is radical, and I think there is a corrective experience in sequentially singing through the Psalter, because there's this sense that there is not an emotion I can have that I cannot have before God.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
Right? Like,
that's so good.
I can be angry, and I can be angry before God. I can be sad, and I can be sad before God. And like, it's not just that. And there are some that aren't in the Psalter, but when we look at the canon of Scripture, like, your particular nuance of an issue might not be there, but the idea is that that there's no grief that man has that God wasn't acquainted with. And it's like, go in there and you can find a psalm if you're thinking of taking that drink or stepping out on your missus or hitting somebody real hard. Like, I promise you, there is a song in the Psalter that can peg you dead to rights in terms of the inward emotional space, if not the content on the surface.
Yeah.
And I really think that that's a pretty radical thing. And yes, as a mental health professional, I think one of the toxic positivities does make manifest in the church proper, in that Sunday mornings, it's all like, I was lost and then you found me and life is great.
Brother, life is good, man. Praise God.
And like brother, life is good, but like, it's not all gonna feel good all the time. And just because it is purposed for your good in the providence of God doesn't mean you can see it or access it or feel it right now. Mm-hmm. And I think those are things that are a little more nuanced. And going back to lazy, that's a harder discussion to have with my brother than like, praying for you, Jesus loves you, right? Like, it's a harder, it's more costly to me as the person walking alongside you. So be willing to do a more costly interaction with those in your community, because toxic positivity, I think, is genuinely toxic. And when you find that you're the one in the ditch, that sunshine, rainbows, and unicorns is going to fall really flat really quickly. And that's not what you want. So don't, do unto others, right?
Yes. And I think one of the terrible long-lasting side effects of this is when you paint a Christianity or a God who is all rainbows and butterflies, and if you do this, say this, it's almost like a math equation and everything's going to work out for you right away. When it doesn't happen, because it won't happen, because that's not the game God plays, then it's a crisis of faith, and you think that God lets you down, but you were actually handed a veneer of the real thing.
Well, I mean, not to point, but like, this is literally a codification, just like a succinct of like the prosperity gospel. And I'm not trying to pick a denominational
She doesn't know, but we're not prosperity gospel at all. But I
I'm pretty ecumenical, but like, that could be awkward for everybody. But what I'm saying is it's this idea, like, if you sow a seed, you're going to reap it is math.
It's math. Yeah.
But I actually think the harder lesson for me to tell you as a person in grief, and for me to internalize as a person grieving, is when you look at the here and now and you look at the horizon line and all you see is something that feels unjust, unfair, heavy, or whatever those negative things are. The call isn't, if I can just do this process, I can pull myself out of my ditch through the ways that I've demonstrated my faithfulness or my sufficiency of belief. The broader message is, when you can't see any of it, when it all seems obscured, do you believe the Lord God does right and just? Like, do you believe that? Are you hanging your head on that? And honestly, when I'm myself struggling imperfectly, sometimes it's hard for me to be like, can we believe that together? And sometimes when you're the person hurting, that's a harder message to hear than like, well, if you tithe more regularly and were more frequent in service, God would fix your garbage, right? Like, it's easier to think like, if I just showed up double the amount, I'd feel better.
Yeah,
it's harder.
It's more black and white, and the gray of actually a life of faith is reality.
Yeah, and that lived experience of like, I'm just gonna have to trust that Jesus is for my good and for my growth, even when I can't see possibly how that is manifest out of whatever that here and now is and how painful that is, right? Like, it's hard. And I think we don't want to acknowledge that it's hard often. And I think we feel like hypocrites saying it when we're still fighting ourselves to believe it sometimes, right? Because sometimes the whole community, like, think about COVID. There were whole communities in a ditch. And I don't know about y'all, but 2024 has started out like rough for like my tribe. Like 2024 has not been smooth sailing. And when you yourself are struggling and you know that that's what your brother needs to hear, and you know that you're kind of like faking it till you make it, it's hard to say like, look, there are days I struggle to see this and believe this and walk this out too. But I think this is what we both need to hear. I think it's just harder fought Christianity.
Yeah.
And it's like, be the harder fought Christian. Like, do the thing, do the hard thing. Because on the far side of that, it's the out is through. Like, the only good way out is through. Yeah. So toxic, like.
So we can basically just say like toxic positivity, 3 thumbs down?
Like
all the thumbs down?
Like all the thumbs. I'm like, but here's the thing. Acknowledge that it's real. Acknowledge that it's a glib and easy answer, and acknowledge that on some level about certain issues, you probably are apt to reach at it. So you can at least be self-aware. And like, if you don't have the goods, at least be like, man, you know what? I'm tapped out and I don't know a lot about that. Let me get you connected with somebody who can have some more empathy in that space, you know? At least at that, you're not devaluing. So whenever you find yourself retorting to the negative thing with a positive thing, rather than saying, yeah, I really hear you. I hear you in that. Like, or my heart aches with you and for you in that. When you find yourself reaching for that, give yourself a whole heaping cup of shut the up, and then refer out to somebody else within the body that has the juice. Does that make sense? Like, acknowledge, because sometimes you don't have it, but refer rather than trying to just like mask it with the glib shiny happy, right?
That's
like
so
like just acknowledge, like, I don't have it today.
Yeah.
Here, talk to my sister. She looks like she's got margin, you know? I mean, I just think it's the only effective thing to do, and I think it's more compassionate long term. Harder, but more compassionate.
Yeah.
So yes, I agree that it's there, and it's don't do it if you can avoid it at all.
Well, that's it for this episode of Atypical Talk. We are going to be having Creation back on here in a few weeks for our next episode, but that's it for our conversations today. If you have any topics, questions, or anything like that, you can email those to atypicaltalkpod@gmail.com. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at atypicaltalkpod. Make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to get updates when new episodes go live. We hope that these conversations today have helped you think wider, love deeper, and partner with God to bring the up there down here in your everyday life. Thanks for listening.